Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful sunny day here in College Station. I'm excited to be with you today. I'd love for you to have your handout with you, which will help you follow along with us today. It's going to have some fill in the blanks, some short answer, and some discussion questions that should help um, keep you guys along and also help you guys synthesize some of the material we're going to go over. Today, we're going to be going over the diffusion of drone technology as a case study for Rogers. So first off, some learning objectives. Um, we want to be able to, by end of this, to be able to understand Rogers' idea of diffusion of innovations, to apply the innovation developmental process, as well as analyze case studies such as drone technology using Rogers 2003, and specifically be able to investigate diffusion of innovations through a research and commercialization lens. So first off, as a foundation for what we'll be doing today, we need to be able to understand what exactly is diffusion, which is defined by Rogers as the process in which innovation is communicated through channels over time among the members of a social system. This really focuses on communication and channels and the share of information about a new idea and how that's really intertwined in all the levels of the diffusion process and the adoption process of a new innovation. So for Rogers, this boils down to four main steps, which is the innovation. This is the idea, the need that something's filling. Then two, communication channels, which is how an idea spreads and how it's then developed over time, and through a social system. So now going into our case study of drones, what exactly is a drone? And here are two different definitions. They can get a little wordy, but overall, I just want you guys to be aware of that. A drone is referred to as an unmanned aircraft that is flying or moving without an individual directly controlling it within that structure. So here I'm going to go over some of the timeline of where drones were, where we are today, and how we got there. So first, in the 1850s, this is the idea of the first like drone that hit, and it was actually with balloons used in warfare, where Austria attacks Venice by flying balloons with loaded explosives. This isn't necessarily a drone because it wasn't controlled technologically, but it was a catalyst for drone development and really spiked the interest and research, development, and all this into drones. And fast forward to 1907, this is when the first quadcopter, which was created in the structure, should be pretty familiar to you today. It's pictured up above. It's that four copter design that we see with drones today, which is pretty cool that even in 1907 that structure was made, and how well it stuck to where we are now in 2024. 1950 and 1945 was the biggest jump that we saw in terms of the R&D of drones. So we're seeing the first pilotless aircraft in World War One. And the overall theme of this section here is the first instance of radio-controlled unmanned aircraft where users were able to be away from the aircraft and controlling it through radio systems. And some of these were mass-produced. For example, the radio plane was the first UAV product mass-produced. And this is kind of where some of the instances started where we were able to see control of drones from larger distances. And this is when the first cruise missile was created, something that was very vital to warfare and is still really critical to it as well. The Vietnam War was the biggest stage we saw in revamping drone surveillance. As we know, Vietnam was one of the deadliest wars. It was very brutal. It was fought on some interesting soil with guerrilla warfare and whatnot. So surveillance was critical in terms of saving lives. So a lot of effort was put into this and reconnaissance specifically. And this is when drones were starting to move around a little bit away from just being UAV products and into more sophisticated surveillance, which, for example, as stated below, some drones were used as decoys, some were used as fixed targets, dropping propaganda, videography, this kind of sense. And this focus really meant that drones had to be further developed with endurance, range, and height, and stealth to be able to report back some of this information. So we're now fast forwarding to what I call more of the modern timeline of drones history. So in the 60s and 70s, this is when the first recreational use of drones happened. And it's kind of funny. It's just, through RC planes and other small radio frequency devices that people could socially interact with a little bit. Into the 1980s, this is when assault was more prioritized. And they were becoming more efficient. They had better power sources. They were inexpensive. This is when the 80s is when we saw a heavy dose of them involved in war, and especially in the Israel Syrian war. It was pretty interesting that drones were actually critical to the win for Israel. They were a catalyst for winning, as Israel lost very little lives and was able to win handedly using drones. And this kind of spiked some other programs as people saw the competitive advantages in warfare, with the U.S. beginning the UAV program to develop even further inexpensive drones. And as a result of that, from 1990 to 2010, we're seeing a big uptick in some of the most famous drones in war that we saw that are super efficient, super successful in terms of surveillance, attacks, this and that. And for example, one of the most famous drones in our history is the Predator drone, which was able to launch missiles and surveillance video to be able to find Osama bin Laden. As many of you know, this was a full-scale attack using drone technology to then provide information to Navy SEALs that were able then to go in. This year was also really important because in 2006, the FAA officially begins clearing commercial drone permits, and consumer applications begin, kind of tying back to some of the programs that made drones less expensive and alternative power sources. Consumers began with the spread of mass media about these, especially through information such as the findings of Osama bin Laden. Privatized companies are being able to see more of what these drones are capable of, how they work, and this communication channel then transitions into the first slow start of drone permits being privatized, in the sense that new applications were going to be available for everyday consumers like you and me to be able to buy and apply to our daily lives. And this instance in 2006 really started where we are today. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly what's going on with drones because there's so much happening, but the awareness is extremely high. The adoption levels are extremely high. Drones are finding themselves in just about every sphere that we find ourselves in. And that's pretty interesting and something we really are going to study here today. So in this area, we're seeing thousands of permits issued and tripling per year. Drones are becoming really popular in videography and photography, for example. I know I'm an avid golf watcher on YouTube as well, and it's pretty cool to see what videographers are able to do using drones now. We're also seeing delivery services. Like, for example, there's a picture up here about Amazon, which is developing drones to deliver packages now. We're seeing do-it-yourself drones, packages that are able to be super, super personalized to needs. For example, police officers and firefighters are using these kits to be able to personalize drones to be able that they can work with on a daily basis. They're able to, mostly for surveillance purposes, to be able to go into dangerous situations and report back. And it's pretty cool to see, just in these couple examples, how different this is than the original design of drones. So now that we have a brief history and foundation of where we are with drones and how we got here, we're going to apply this to Rogers, specifically Chapter 4, the Generation of Innovations, and the innovation development process we see below, as I feel that this fits most closely to our example. And there we're going to work in hand at really showing us the commercialization process and the communication channels involved that really intertwine this whole linear process and make it very, very individualized, and allow us to really have a great example of it. So I'm going to go through each step briefly, and kind of tie it back to the timeline of where we were. So first is recognizing a problem and a need. And this is pretty straightforward. He roughly defines this as, it's vague in terms of how we're recognizing the need of the problem, but any innovation starts with a need. You're not going to be innovative in creating something you can't if there's not a need for that. So for example, drones were used in increasing efficiency in warfare from the get-go. And that's obviously transitioned to even more needs, from entertainment needs to delivery needs at Amazon. The recognizing of need is happening fluidly throughout this entire timeline, but mostly starts with the warfare side of it. Next, research. Rogers mostly ties research to the idea of what technology is at heart, which is a design for instrumental action that reduces uncertainty and the cause and effect relationship involved in achieving a desired outcome. And this tool is what's being researched and developed. You're researching the need, what it would take to fix that need. And it really starts with basic research, transitioning into applied research, and then development. So, for example, this kind of ties back to the first quadcopter, the first pilot unmanned aircraft, the Vietnam War, all these research instances that increased what the drones could do to be able to make the situations that they were needed in even more successful, for surveillance or for longer distances, for more critical airstrikes, this and that. Next is development. And this section is really tied to research and oftentimes really intertwined and hard to differentiate because this is what the heart of R&D really is. And a lot of what you're seeing in this process is a reciprocal relationship between both, where they're working hand in hand and going back and forth. It's not purely research right to development. It's development to research, research to development, and we're moving fluidly throughout this process that Rogers is outlining. And here are some different quotes about what he defines it as. But what I really want to highlight is that many lines of communication channels feed between R&D specifically and then into commercialization. It's a lot of R&D working together and then focusing into commercialization. And a lot of it has to do with these communication channels and effectiveness of how well people are able to communicate these ideas to make them even that much better for higher adoption levels. So for development here, just one example I'm giving again from our timeline is development is heavily tied to drone war history as competitive advantages and hastiness continues. For example, Israeli warfare does a really good job of using them to win a critical war. The US then pumps more information and research into developing their own product that becomes scaled even higher. And any stages along the line, you can see the buildup of their capabilities and developing even more to fit the audience so that potential adopters are more likely to interact with it. And for example, with awards, it's interesting because it has less to do with consumer options and buying into it, and it's more looking for that competitive advantage. So that's partially why I do think that the study on war is really interesting for Rogers, in the sense that war really pinpoints a competitive advantage over other countries. So you're seeing a hastiness. There's uncertainty of what's going to be faced next, but how can we create a product that gives us a better chance of success? Commercialization, this is kind of the most important one in terms of our case study, but also really important to Rogers as well, because it's really getting over the hump in terms of adoption levels. He defines this as the conversion of an idea from research into a product or service for sale. And this is where we're kind of starting to dive into the effectiveness and the adoption levels that'll come next. And a lot of this is the commercialization can happen in a lot of different ways. And that's what Rogers continues to reiterate. This can come from research and development, but it also can come from practice as new solutions are sought out. And it's heavily privatized. And this is a lot of what we're seeing here in our study of drones, where commercialization is happening when the patents become available. As war was heavily dominant for drone usage and pretty much privatized in that sense, where it was monopolized, I should say. As soon as information grows and technology spreads, especially with instances like Osama bin Laden, the Predator missile that became heavily famous or heavily in the mass media, people began to be aware of what drones are capable now, and new sparks of creativity happen that find new needs for them. And this is where we're seeing patents, the socialization of drones beyond just warfare, that they can be used as entertainment. They can be used as making life simpler for common people, not purely a protective war device. Diffusion adoption. This is just the spread of the innovation, how consumers are responding and how they're bouncing off it. And this is kind of where we're seeing a little bit more in the golden age, where awareness is continuing to grow. More options of what drones can do happen. That's when we'd go back to research and development. How can we make this product even better? This is the media, this is the communication channels at work within Rogers' system, where we're going back and forth trying to reestablish what the new need is, where are we now, how can we make it even that much better? This is where we're seeing do it your own kits that, for example, like the police and firefighters using it specifically for their own needs. Heavily personalized from videography to photography. A crazy amount of patents being issued. People are diving into this as awareness grows, and they want to get their hands on their own version of it. Consequences. This is an interesting part in the story of drone, just because it's very new. We're in the middle of kind of the consequences stages. But for Rogers, he defines this as the changes that occur to an individual or to a social system as a result of the adoption or rejection of the innovation. So right now, drones are heavily adopted right now, to the point where our lives are changing very quickly. Believe it or not, it still feels like drones and for Amazon, for example, are far off, but they're already being used. Delivery options like Chick-fil-A delivering your Chick-fil-A through a robot, like similar things are really becoming a part of our daily lives. So now we're kind of in this page where we're trying to anticipate what the consequences will be. And I think it's interesting because we can kind of be, as change agents right now in this story, we can kind of begin to think a little bit ahead and how this adoption process in Diffusion, where it's going, what could be the next step taken to make the product even better, but also anticipate the changes that this has to our current social system and how we're going to apply that. So, for example, my initial thought is, although drones are increasing our efficiency of daily lives, they're making our lives more entertaining, my initial thought goes to jobs and job security. As we're putting more and more effort into drones, how is this affecting, for example, the jobs available for Amazon? How, I know because Amazon is one of the biggest companies in the world. How does this affect the jobs that people might be having? But also on the other hand, how can drones effectively increase the level of connectivity that we have? So it's that push and pull as change agents that we can begin to dive into when we consider the consequences from what we've had in the past to what we have now. And this is kind of why I write a question mark here, because the cool part about this study is that we can kind of dive into it on our own. So here, just going back to this process, I kind of wanted to end this highlighting the fluidity of, yes, this timeline and this 1 through 6 step of the innovation development process looks like it's a building method, which it is, but there's also a recycling effect of going back to others. They're all intertwined and they're all working through communication channels. For example, the needs and the problem are never solved with one innovation. That as, like, for example, as drones became effective in warfare, there was instances where they could be even more effective when we go back to research and development and then work forward. And I thought one of the interesting things that I tried to outline this for you is that the need, problem, research, and development stages are heavily tied to the historical timeline. Commercialization, diffusion, and adoption stages are heavily tied to the modern timeline, and the consequences are kind of future oriented. So you can kind of see the, yes, it is a step-by-step model, but there's a heavily amount of connectivity that's happening through communication channels, from mass media to research and development groups to war rooms that are looking for just one more competitive advantage that they can have. So although Rogers puts this in a position where it looks heavily linear, there's a lot of movement and fluidity that goes in along in lines that make this process complicated, but also interesting, especially through the lens that we're looking through with drone technology. That's only going up, but there's a lot of back and forth movement to be able to create that commercialization and privatization that we're seeing today, that are giving us the opportunity to interact with drones in so many different ways. So here I have my references, just two, one from Rogers, which is what we mostly focused on, as well as where I got some of this information on what drones are. So wrapping up, I've appreciated working with you guys through this. It's really helped me to better understand Rogers looking through this lens, and I really wanted to help you guys synthesize the material kind of in the way I was able to through these fill in the blank and short answer and discussion questions. So I hope you're able to finish the fill in the blank as we go. And now I'd love for you to finish the short answer just so you have that background information for yourself as you dive into the discussion questions. That should help you guys apply this a little further. And I hope that gives you guys a good opportunity to communicate with some other peers as well. So thank you so much for spending some time with me, and have a good rest of your day.